Star Wars Jedi Survivor is almost here, and I really want to argue that the game should lean more toward its Sekiro inspiration. I really enjoyed Jedi Fallen Order. It was a catalyst for me to get into FromSoft games. It was a catalyst for me to get into Sekiro at the time. I didn't finish Sekiro, I beat it later, but the combat in Jedi Fallen Order was good. It was difficult. It was one of the first games, I think it was the first game actually in my history of a gamer where I went back, replayed it at a harder difficulty, and I absolutely loved it. Now, I have an article about somebody saying that they might have taken inspiration from the grappling hook in Sekiro, and it really sparked an idea in my mind that I wanted to argue. And we'll take a look at the article in just a second, but I really wanted to argue that I want the combat in Jedi Fallen Order 2, essentially what this is, Jedi Survivor. I want it to feel more like that tight, very threatening, very crisp Sekiro combat. I don't know about you, but I think there's good and there's bad in Jedi Fallen Order's combat. I think it's very threatening. I think every encounter is extremely important. Even like a ram or like a little bug can kill you. My producer joked that he put the game on the absolute hardest difficulty and he was dead from a bug within 5 minutes. Yeah, they kill you pretty fast if you're not paying attention, especially if you're not accustomed to the rhythm. So there were really good things about Jedi Fallen Order's combat. I really enjoyed the way that you could parry and manage different things and sort of interweave it with the Force. However, I also think there were things about the combat that left a lot to be desired for. Once you played it and then go and play something that's really tight like Sekiro, I do think it starts to sort of show itself to be the inferior combat system. Now, I'm not slamming it and saying Sekiro's better, but I do think Sekiro approaches combat in a way that is far more pristine and tight, and I would love to see that come to Jedi Survivor. The other thing that I really noticed the last time I played Jedi Fallen Order, just to kind of experiment with it and feel it, feel the game again after all this time, is there was no enemy collision, and that drives me nuts. And what I mean is, I can't stand when you have two melee enemies and they can swing through each other, so when you go to engage one, the other one can swing from behind and get you. I do not like that. I would prefer that to not be a thing. I also think that it should apply to us, by the way, swinging through an enemy and getting somebody on the other side, but I guess with a lightsaber you probably could argue that that's realistic. However, I'd love to see some of those things addressed, tighten down on the combat. We know there's going to be 5 stances, very similar to the 5 stances in Ghost of Tsushima. There's 4 base stances in Tsushima when you start out. They sort of added a 5th stance, not really, but they kind of added a 5th stance in the Ikishima DLC. But essentially, Ghost of Tsushima had the 4 stances, and then Jedi Survivor is going to have 5. That's a perfect opportunity, I think, to really punish the player for picking the wrong stance, approaching a fight the wrong way. They have said that the 5 stances will be better or worse depending on the enemy, but they leave it up for you to figure that out. It was a little different in Ghost of Tsushima. They sort of told you different enemies. You had spear, you had sword and shield, etc. You sort of knew what enemies required which stance. They just kind of told you. I like that Jedi Survivor isn't telling you, and that really reminds me of Sekiro. There were bosses in Sekiro where it was far better to focus on their posture instead of damage. There were bosses where the more you focused on damage, the quicker their posture would fall. And it was kind of a chess game. You kind of had to feel them out and experiment and see which way you wanted to go. I remember playing Madame Butterfly and somebody being like, literally hit her until she deflects. And I was like, oh, and I did it. I think my second try after they gave me that tip, I crushed her. That little tip made all the difference in the world. Learning how to do the, I believe it's called the Mikri counter, where you step on the spear. Super satisfying. One of my favorite things to do in Sekiro. And I think that really adds to combat and the sense of finesse. I want to see way more of that in Jedi Survivor. So let's look at this article. Let's see what they have to say about the grappling hook and see if maybe we can deduce if there's more Sekiro influence in this game. There clearly was Sekiro influence in the first game, so let's take a look here. This is from Game Rant. Jared Stewart wrote this. He said, Jedi Fallen Order took inspiration from combat from Sekiro, and Star Wars Jedi Survivor may have taken inspiration from its platforming. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order was already highly reminiscent of Sekiro Shadows Die Twice due to its emphasis on parries in combat. This worked well for Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order's combat due to the game also having only a default weapon that players need to practice with and get good at brandishing against enemies. Players eventually received a dual-bladed attachment as well as an attachment that separates the hilt into dual lightsabers, but the parry mechanic is still paramount regardless of which stance players adopt in combat. There was not a dual lightsabers stance in Jedi Fallen Order, so I just want to make sure. They may be slightly misinformed. There were like finishers and flourishes you could do with the two sabers, but it wasn't a stance. I believe, unconfirmed, dual sabers is a stance in Jedi Survivor, because in one of the fights where it seems like Cal's having a hard time, he suddenly grabs his second lightsaber and then runs at the guy. It's almost like, okay, this guy's beating me up. I'm going to try dual saber. We know that there's the big crossguard saber that's like almost like a greatsword, and then we also know the return of the twin saber, like the twin blade, where there's a saber on each side. But the dual-bladed attachment's not the same as dual sabers. So just need to make sure that we know that that's not actually accurate. There was no dual saber stance. Now, basically, in Jedi Fallen Order, you had single saber, or you had like the Darth Maul dual blade, and the dual blade was really, really good for spamming in groups. If you were getting overwhelmed on Dathomir, they were kind of like the zombie, creatures that it was better to use that on when you got surrounded. We've already seen that in the Jedi Survivor trailer against the combat droids, the battle droids, the Roger Rogers. He throws it and it like whips through a group and then he catches it again. I think that basically confirms that stance. I also think there's a stance where he holds it down, the lightsaber pointed down like Starkiller. So I think we have all 5 stances in that trailer if you pay close attention. You have standard one saber, you have dual saber, you have dual blade like the twin blade, then you have the saber pointed down like Starkiller, and then you have the confirmed crossguard like heavy saber. That's all 5. I think all 5 are in the trailer. You just have to kind of look for it. There's little hints that are there. So hopefully those parries, those fighting styles really, really land well and feel more like Sekiro. From a bit of gameplay that has been shown for Star Wars Jedi Survivor, it would seem like all of Fallen Order's combat fundamentals are returning. This is great for fans who love the original game and spent time expertly mastering combat with a lightsaber. Oh, one of the stances is also saber with a gun, so I might have said too many, but in any case, I think we've seen all of them. I think all of them are kind of present in the trailer. This is great for fans who love the original game and spent time expertly mastering combat with a lightsaber, but there are other areas that Survivor could improve from its predecessor, such as the platforming sequences. Thankfully, it would seem that Star Wars Jedi Survivor may be taking another page out of Sekiro's book for inspiration on platforming with a newly introduced grappling hook. I welcome this change. I do think some of the platforming in Jedi Fallen Order left something to be desired for. Some of the jumps, and like you got to grab the rope. It was a little awkward at times. If you were trying to do like a no-death run, probably pretty easy to fall at certain points. And some of it was fun, but some of it was, a little wonky. In a brief shot from Star Wars Jedi Survivor's gameplay trailer, it revealed that Cal Kestis would have some sort of grappling hook. The shot shows Cal leaping forward with nothing below him before force dashing forward and firing out a cable that connects to a pole that sticks outward horizontally. The cable reels him in, and he hangs on to the pole momentarily before seemingly using his momentum to leap from it. I loved seeing that. That's just more, extra tools for Cal to use, and I agree. That does feel reminiscent to Sekiro. This is a glimpse of what platforming could look like for a lot of Star Wars Jedi Survivor, but since much is also withheld from fans in this trailer, it would not be surprising to learn that other platforming mechanics have been added as well. There's also mounts, so there could be things where you have to do platforming with the mounts. I'm not sure. They haven't really shown. They also showed not really a mount, but a gliding mechanic. It's like almost like a pterodactyl kind of a thing. A critical part of platforming in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order was Cal's Force abilities, and then when they were involved, such as sprinting and hopping between narrow walls, or double jumping into a force pull to swing on a vine, and these features have yet to be fully shown in the sequel. Platforming was less exciting when players were bouncing on inflatable pods in Kashyyyk, but Survivor has an opportunity to improve platforming greatly with a grappling hook and the functions that may provide it in gameplay. Further, because Cal will presumably still have access to all Force abilities he recollected in Fallen Order, it makes sense to iterate on platforming with an item as versatile as a grappling hook. That's also a great way to let you keep all your abilities, so you jump in and feel like your stuff's being expanded upon instead of taken away. So right there, they're showing how it worked in Sekiro. Grapple hooks are not completely alien in the world of Star Wars, as fans have already seen, such as the ones used in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, but since the Star Wars Jedi franchise has already been explicit about its favorable From Software inspirations, it would make sense if the addition of a grappling hook was also inspired by Sekiro, Shadow Die Twice. Are we forgetting about Boba Fett? Anyway. Sekiro's grappling hook is multifaceted, but chiefly used as a way to traverse chasms and other gaps in guided platforming. Much of the game's landscape is built on verticality that players can scale with consecutive grappling hook inputs, flinging Wolf around from one perch point to another. There's actually some really crazy parts in Sekiro where you have to use the grappling hook, and they weren't actually some of my favorite parts, but I definitely think something that Jedi Survivor is going to bring in that we know will be a greater presence is the Metroidvania element. If you're not familiar with the term Metroidvania, it's from Metroid and Castlevania. It's basically games where you go into an area and you clearly can't get into it and you come back later. Typically, the most readily relatable example is you suddenly have a double jump and now you can get higher. They did this in Control, a great action-adventure third-person Metroidvania that you should check out. Amazing game, Control. And it was certainly present in Jedi Fallen Order. You were going back to areas with new abilities and could get into secrets and could get into areas that were previously closed off to you. So the grappling hook in this game will likely play into that. That was not as much of a presence in Sekiro, but that I think again is a great melding of the two, and I really want to see, I'm more wanting to see Sekiro combat influence, man. Tighten things up. Don't make it feel kind of sloppy, kind of loose. There were elements of Jedi Fallen Order's combat that did feel that way. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier in the video, but that was one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video. I do feel like the combat was a little loose at times. Otherwise, the grappling hook can also be used to close the distance on particular enemies when the associable prompt appears, or players can grapple from branch to branch to remain undetected by enemies below. Cal Kestis is only seen using his grappling hook once in the Star Wars Jedi Survivor latest trailer, but it would be exciting if it had some multifaceted uses as Sekiro's. Star Wars Jedi Survivor releases March 17th. Oh, it's right around the corner for PC, PS5, and Xbox Series X and S. That is something to remember. They're leaving behind old gen, so I'm really hoping performance and the graphics see a nice uptick, or at the very least, just very solid in the wake of some games recently where their performance is a little worrying. That's a nice way of putting it. Anyways, I want to know what you think. What'd you think of Jedi Fallen Order's combat? Was it tight? Was it loose? Would you want to see that increased tightness and parry reliance and stance reliance to make it feel more like Sekiro and Tsushima, kind of have those melee influences? Let me know what you know. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And as always, I appreciate you supporting my live streams here on this channel as well as my uploads. Hit subscribe and the bell button so I can see you in the next video.